Every visitor to Newport knows the breakers, but few recognize the looming Gothic masterpiece next door. Why? Because the second largest Gilded Age palace in America had a tragedy so dark and sudden, its history was sold to nuns and forgotten forever. Present-day Newport, Rhode Island. Tour buses idle outside the breakers, their engines running while guides usher groups of tourists through wrought iron gates. A quarter-mile down the street, more buses queue for Marble House. The Preservation Society operates 8 historic properties in this small coastal town, generating millions in annual revenue. Visitors fly in from across the world to photograph these monuments to Gilded Age excess. They snap pictures of gold leaf ceilings and imported marble floors. They marvel at the scale, the craftsmanship, the sheer audacity of wealth frozen in limestone and plaster. Walk 3 blocks east on Ochre Point Avenue. The chateau rises from manicured lawns like something transported from the Loire Valley. 60 rooms, 3 stories of Indiana limestone carved into Gothic revival splendor. Turrets and dormers break the roofline. Massive windows overlook Cliff Walk and the Atlantic beyond. By every architectural measure, this building belongs on the mansion tour circuit. Richard Morris Hunt designed it, the same architect who created the breakers for the Vanderbilts. The construction cost $4.5 million in 1892 money. Adjust for inflation, and you're looking at roughly $160 million in modern dollars. No tour buses stop here. The building serves as part of Salve Regina University's campus. Students cut across the lawn heading to class. A sign identifies it as Ochre Court, administrative offices, and special events venue. The Great Hall occasionally hosts university functions. Otherwise, the building exists in functional obscurity. College kids study for exams in rooms designed for orchestras. They barely glance at the carved stone fireplace that cost more than most Newport cottages in the 1890s. The gilded ceiling details go unnoticed. The hand-carved oak paneling might as well be drywall. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ochre Court was commissioned by one of America's wealthiest families. The Golets didn't need to prove anything to anybody. They were old money when the Vanderbilts were still new. Yet they built this palace with the same architect, the same unlimited budget, the same obsessive attention to detail that defined Newport's golden age. The mansion should have joined its neighbors in Preservation Society immortality. Tourists should be lining up to see Hunt's Gothic masterpiece. Instead, it vanished. Not demolished, not burned, not lost to hurricanes or financial ruin in the conventional sense. Ochre Court disappeared through a stranger process, one that left the building perfectly intact while erasing it from history. The second largest mansion in Newport became invisible in plain sight. The story of how that happened reveals something darker about preservation, memory, and which palaces we choose to remember. It starts with a man who didn't need to build anything at all, and it ends with nuns buying a palace for 3% of its value. Between those points lies a tragedy of waste, bad timing, and institutional transformation so complete that most people don't know this building exists. 5 years of enjoyment, 55 years of burden, 75 years of institutional use. The numbers alone tell you something went catastrophically wrong. 1891. Ogden Goelet stood at the peak of American wealth without having earned a single dollar of it himself. The fortune arrived in 1879 when death struck the Goelet family twice within months. First his uncle Peter, a bachelor whose entire estate flowed to his nephews. Then his father Robert, whose Manhattan real estate holdings had appreciated beyond calculation. Ogden and his brother Robert inherited approximately $40 million, split between them. The fortune stemmed primarily from Manhattan real estate, blocks of property their grandfather had purchased when New York was still a compact settlement at the southern tip of the island. The Goelet approach to wealth differed fundamentally from the Vanderbilts or Carnegies. They never sold property, only leased it, allowing their holdings to appreciate as Manhattan expanded northward. No factories, no railroads, No stock market gambles, just land and the patient certainty that cities only grow in one direction. By 1891, Ogden controlled real estate throughout Manhattan. His properties generated income while he did essentially nothing. The approach emphasized conservative stewardship over speculation, which meant the family name never appeared in bankruptcy proceedings or scandal sheets. The Golets were establishment. They didn't need to fight their way into Ms. Astor's ballroom because they'd been there for generations. This created an interesting problem. When you inherit $40 million at age 33, when your fortune grows automatically through urban expansion, when society already accepts you as legitimate old money, what exactly do you build to prove yourself? The Vanderbilts constructed palaces to demonstrate they belonged among American aristocracy. The nouveau riches spent fortunes on European titles and Fifth Avenue mansions to purchase respectability. Ogden Golet needed none of that. Yet he commissioned Richard Morris Hunt anyway. Hunt had already designed the base of the Statue of Liberty and was working on the breakers for Cornelius Vanderbilt. The architect moved between clients with ease, translating French chateau into American limestone. When Ogden approached him about a Newport cottage, Hunt saw an opportunity. The Vanderbilts wanted visibility. Ogden wanted something quieter, but no less substantial. A statement disguised as restraint. The site Hunt selected overlooked the Atlantic from Ochre Point, named for the clay color of the coastal bluffs. The location provided everything Newport required: ocean views, proximity to other cottages, and enough elevation to suggest literally looking down on the rest of society. Hunt sketched a French Gothic chateau, 3 stories, 60 rooms, drawing heavily from 16th century Loire Valley architecture. The Château de Chenonceau served as primary inspiration, though Hunt adapted rather than copied. The budget was functionally unlimited. Ogden authorized $4.5 million for construction, equivalent to roughly $160 million today. For context, that exceeded the cost of multiple university endowments. It could have built a dozen public libraries. Instead, it would create a summer house used 3 months per year. Construction began in 1888. Hunt specified Indiana limestone for the exterior, which required quarrying, cutting, and shipping hundreds of tons of stone to Rhode Island. The foundation demanded blasting into bedrock. Every window, every dormer, every carved detail required skilled craftsmen working from Hunt's specifications. The project employed hundreds of workers simultaneously over 4 years. Inside, the design called for a 3-story great hall, hand-carved oak paneling throughout, and a ballroom that could accommodate 200 guests. French decorators Jules Allard and sculptor Carl Bitter handled interior design. The mansion would be among the first in Newport with complete electrical systems, another costly innovation. Ogden supervised construction personally during summer months, traveling between his Fifth Avenue mansion and Newport to review progress. The work proceeded methodically, no shortcuts, no compromises. Hunt's reputation depended on delivering perfection, and Ogden's fortune made perfection affordable. By 1892, Ochre Court stood complete. 60 rooms of Gothic Revival excess, positioned on 13 acres of Olmsted-designed grounds. The result was precisely what Ogden commissioned: a chateau that announced wealth without shouting, old money translated into limestone and plaster. It should have anchored the Golet presence in Newport for generations. Ogden enjoyed his palace for exactly 5 summers. Hunt drew from the chateau of the Loire Valley, particularly the French Gothic style that defined the reign of Louis XIII. The design emphasized verticality: high roofs, elaborate dormers, tall chimneys, turrets that punctured the skyline. The building would rise 3 stories from its clifftop perch, visible from both Ochre Point Avenue and the ocean below. Indiana limestone formed the exterior, quarried from the Midwest and shipped to Rhode Island in massive blocks. The material provided durability and a light color that enhanced the building's presence against Newport's coastal landscape. Every surface received attention. Hand-carved details covered entrances, window frames, and cornices. Gargoyles leered from corners. Friezes wrapped the building. Finials topped every peak. Acanthus leaf motifs appeared wherever stone met stone. The construction demanded specialized labor. Stonemasons who understood Gothic tracery. Carvers capable of reproducing 16th-century French ornament. Engineers to blast the foundation into solid bedrock. The project began in 1888 and consumed 4 years. Hundreds of workers rotated through the site as the chateau took shape, piece by piece. Inside, Hunt created spaces that defied residential scale. The Great Hall soared 3 full stories, its height emphasized by ribbed vaulting that drew the eye upward. A mural titled Feast of the Gods covered the ceiling, executed by European artists brought specifically for the commission. The carved stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel positioned higher than a tall man could reach. Every architectural element reinforced the message. This was not a house, but a monument. Ochre Court became among Newport's earliest fully electrified residences, incorporating a steel frame for structural support beneath its limestone skin. The innovation allowed Hunt to create larger interior spaces without the thick walls traditional masonry required. Modern engineering hidden behind medieval aesthetics. The combination typified Gilded Age ambition, using cutting-edge technology to recreate European antiquity. French decorators Jules Allard handled the interior design, importing materials and craftsmen when local talent proved insufficient. Hand-carved oak paneling lined the major rooms. The ballroom could accommodate 200 guests, its proportions calculated for orchestras and dancing. Stained glass appeared throughout, each window custom designed for its location. The level of detail extended to spaces guests would never see. Even servants' quarters received carved trim and quality materials. The grounds required their own attention. 13 acres demanded landscaping that matched the chateau's ambition. While Frederick Law Olmsted's firm handled the broader design, the immediate gardens surrounding the house received obsessive care. Terraces stepped down toward the ocean. Ornamental iron gates marked the Ochre Point Avenue entrance, their design echoing the Gothic revival details of the house itself. Hunt even included a personal touch. On a garden structure near the main entry, designed to resemble a cathedral's rood screen, he carved a self-portrait. The image showed the architect contemplating his own work, hand to chin, mimicking the medieval master builders who signed their cathedrals in stone. The gesture revealed Hunt's understanding of what he'd created. This wasn't merely a residence, it was architecture as art, a complete expression of Beaux-Arts training applied to American wealth. By 1892, every element stood complete. 60 rooms spread across 3 floors. Every surface finished. Every detail resolved. The chateau Hunt envisioned now existed in limestone reality, second in size only to the breakers among Newport cottages. The final accounting showed $4.5 million spent, a figure that dwarfed most institutional budgets of the era. August 27, 1897. Ogden Goelet died aboard his yacht at Cowes on the Isle of Wight after being ill for 2 months. He was 46 years old. The yacht was the Mayflower, a 300-foot steam vessel launched just the previous year. William Broadbent, doctor to the Prince of Wales, had been attending to him. His wife Mary and their children were present. The end came in the same luxury that defined his adult life, surrounded by polished wood and brass fittings, attended by the finest medical care money could purchase. The timing was devastating in its cruelty. Ochre Court had been completed 5 years earlier in 1892. 5 Newport seasons, 5 summers of entertaining, 5 brief windows when the chateau served its intended purpose as a stage for Goelet family prominence. The rest of the year, The mansion sat largely empty, maintained by a staff of 30, who kept the building ready for an owner who used it perhaps 12 weeks annually. Those 5 summers represented Ogden's entire return on a $4.5 million investment. He never saw the building age, never watched his children grow up in those Gothic halls, never experienced Ochre Court as anything but new. The fortune he'd inherited, carefully managed, wisely invested, had produced this palace. And then time simply ran out. The yacht carried his body back to Newport. His funeral was held aboard the Mayflower, and he was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. The estate he left behind was substantial. His fortune was valued at approximately $60 million, double what he'd inherited 18 years earlier. The real estate empire continued generating income. The Manhattan properties appreciated steadily. Everything the Gothic approach to wealth promised had materialized exactly as planned, everything except time to enjoy it. Mary inherited the entire estate, along with their 2 children, Mary and Robert Wilson Gothic. The residuary estate of $30 million was divided equally between the children through trusts, with additional provisions ensuring the family's financial security for generations. On paper, the Gothics remained among America's wealthiest families. In practice, Mary faced an immediate problem that money alone couldn't solve. Ochre Court required constant maintenance. The annual costs exceeded $100,000 in 1890s money, equivalent to roughly $3.5 million today. Property taxes consumed additional funds. The staff needed year-round payment regardless of whether the family occupied the house. The heating system alone, designed to warm 60 rooms through New England winters, demanded constant engineering attention. The grounds required full-time groundskeepers. The structure itself, exposed to salt air and Atlantic storms, needed perpetual repair. Mary used the mansion occasionally. Her daughter's Newport social season demanded presence in the right location. The cottage served its function for a few weeks each summer. But the economic equation had fundamentally shifted. When Ogden built Ochre Court, the family had one fortune owner bearing the maintenance burden. Now that fortune was divided into trusts for minors, with Mary managing assets but not controlling them outright. The mansion consumed resources at exactly the same rate, but the financial structure supporting it had fragmented. She could have sold immediately. The Vanderbilts or other Newport families might have purchased the property. But selling meant admitting defeat, acknowledging that the palace Ogden commissioned would serve its purpose for exactly 5 years before becoming too expensive to maintain. Mary held on instead, using Ochre Court when necessary, keeping the staff employed, paying the taxes, watching the building slowly drain family resources year after year. The 1890s gave way to the 1900s. The 19th century ended. The Gilded Age continued, but already the first signs of change were visible. Income taxes, labor organizing, progressive reformers questioning the concentration of wealth. The world Ogden built for was beginning to shift beneath his widow's feet, and she still had a 60-room chateau to maintain. Mary Wilson Gothic faced mathematics that couldn't be solved with sentiment. The mansion demanded feeding regardless of whether anyone lived in it. The typical 8-week Newport season required 27 house servants, 8 coachmen and grooms, and 12 gardeners, 47 people on payroll for 2 months of actual use. But the servants couldn't simply be dismissed for 10 months annually. The core staff remained year-round, maintaining empty rooms, polishing unused silver, keeping the heating system functional through Rhode Island winters. Each week, without family presence, still required wages, food, maintenance materials, repairs. The property taxes alone exceeded what most American families earned in a lifetime. Rhode Island assessed the estate based on its construction value and oceanfront location. The state didn't care whether the Gothics actually occupied the building. The bill arrived annually regardless. Then came the structural maintenance. Salt air corrodes everything. Atlantic storms tested every window seal, every roof slate, every mortar joint. The limestone exterior required constant attention. The elaborate drainage systems needed monitoring. The heating system, revolutionary when installed, now showed its age and demanded specialist engineering knowledge to maintain. A single winter freeze could rupture pipes throughout the 60 rooms, causing catastrophic damage if not immediately addressed. The grounds consumed additional resources. 13 acres of Olmsted landscaping didn't maintain themselves. The formal gardens required professional gardeners who understood perennial care, pruning schedules, and aesthetic principles. The tree-lined drive needed grooming. The terraces descending toward the ocean required constant stabilization against erosion. Neglect any element for a single season and the decline became visible, expensive to reverse. Mary used Ochre Court sparingly. Her daughter required Newport presence for social season appearances. The cottage served its function for a few weeks each summer when maintaining social position demanded it. But the economic reality had fundamentally shifted. When Ogden commissioned the mansion, one fortune supported one property. Now the inheritance was divided through trusts for 2 children, with Mary managing but not controlling the full estate. The mathematics had changed, while the expenses remained constant. She could have sold immediately. Other Newport families might have purchased such a prestigious address. But selling meant admitting the palace Ogden commissioned would serve its purpose for exactly 5 years before becoming unsustainable. That admission carried its own cost, measured in family pride and social positioning. So Mary held on. She paid the bills. She maintained the staff. She opened the chateau for necessary social functions. And she watched the building slowly consume Gothic resources year after year. Each season of minimal use, making the expense harder to justify. The turn of the century arrived. 1900 gave way to 1901, then 1902. The Gilded Age continued but already showed signs of transformation. Progressive reformers questioned concentrated wealth. Labor movements gained strength. Income taxes appeared on the political horizon. The world that created Ochre Court was beginning to shift. In 1904, Mary gave Ochre Court to her son Robert as a wedding gift. The transfer solved nothing economically, but redistributed the burden to the next generation. Robert inherited his father's fortune and his father's palace, along with all the financial obligations attached to both. He continued the pattern his mother established, using the mansion for Newport season, maintaining it expensively year-round, struggling with the same impossible mathematics that had plagued Mary. The costs never decreased. They only grew. Labor expected higher wages. Materials became more expensive. Property taxes increased as Rhode Island's assessment methods became more sophisticated. Every year, Ochre Court demanded more while providing the same limited utility, a few weeks of summer occupation, then months of expensive dormancy. The mansion became a magnificent trap, too valuable to abandon, too expensive to maintain, too publicly visible to neglect. The Gothic name was attached to the property in every newspaper account of Newport society. Selling meant admitting defeat. Maintaining meant hemorrhaging money. There was no good option, only the choice between bad alternatives and worse ones. October 1929. The stock market collapsed, and with it, the economic foundation that sustained Newport's palace culture. The Depression didn't destroy the Gothic fortune overnight. The family's real estate holdings generated income through the worst years, but the crash fundamentally changed what was sustainable. Mansions received less upkeep, were abandoned, or fell to demolition across Newport. Families who'd maintained multiple estates suddenly couldn't afford the staff, the taxes, the constant repairs. Other Newport families found solutions. Countess Gladys Vanderbilt Seycheny opened the Breakers in 1948 to raise funds for the Preservation Society's mission, charging admission for tours while maintaining family residence in private quarters. The model worked. Revenue from tourists covered maintenance costs while preserving the building. Marble House followed similar arrangements. The Elms escaped demolition through Preservation Society acquisition. The Gothic family watched these developments but chose differently. Opening Ochre Court to tourists meant public scrutiny, guided tours through private spaces, strangers examining family possessions. It meant acknowledging the mansion as historical artifact, rather than functioning residence. For old money like the Golitz, that admission carried particular weight. The Vanderbilts were still relatively new to wealth, fighting for social position through spectacle. The Golitz had nothing left to prove, but mathematics don't care about pride. By the 1940s, maintaining Ochre Court had become genuinely unsustainable. The family used it rarely. The building sat mostly empty, while consuming resources at Depression-era rates when every dollar mattered more. Property taxes kept rising. Staff wages increased. Materials for repairs cost more. The equation only worked in one direction. In 1945, the Preservation Society of Newport County was founded, specifically to save threatened mansions. The organization immediately began acquiring properties, creating the museum system that would define Newport tourism for the next 80 years. They approached multiple families about donations or sales. The Breakers, Marble House, the Elms eventually joined their collection, generating millions in annual tourism revenue while preserving architectural masterpieces. The Preservation Society never acquired Ochre Court. The Gothic family had already found another buyer, 1947. The Sisters of Mercy approached the Gothic family with an unusual proposition. The religious order had received a charter from Rhode Island back in 1934 to establish Salve Regina College. 13 years of preparation followed, searching for the right location, raising funds, planning curriculum. They needed a building substantial enough to house a complete college campus. Ochre Court fit perfectly. Robert Gothic, Ogden's son, gifted the mansion to the Sisters of Mercy in memory of his father. The transfer was donation rather than sale, though the practical effect remained identical. The Gothic family escaped crushing maintenance obligations. The sisters acquired an instant campus that would have cost millions to replicate. The college opened that fall, welcoming 58 students on September 24th, Mercy Day in the Catholic calendar. The entire operation fit within Ochre Court's 60 rooms. Students lived on the third floor. Classes occupied the second. Dining and studying happened on the first. The basement became bookstore and snack bar. 8 Sisters of Mercy established their residence in the former servants' quarters. The transaction solved the Gothic problem completely. No more annual maintenance exceeding modern millions. No property taxes, no staff wages, no heating bills through Rhode Island winters. The burden simply vanished, transferred to a religious order that viewed the mansion not as luxury, but as practical educational space. The deal carried no fanfare. Unlike the Vanderbilt homes that became tourist attractions with public announcements and Preservation Society involvement, Ochre Court changed hands quietly through private arrangement. No newspaper coverage of the donation. No public ceremony beyond the college opening mass. The Gothic family simply walked away from the second-largest mansion in Newport, and most people never noticed. When the Sisters of Mercy took possession of Ochre Court in 1947, they inherited not a museum piece, but a structure that needed to earn its keep. Their task was practical: convert an immense Gilded Age chateau into a functioning college. Virtually every grand space absorbed a new institutional purpose. Ballrooms became classrooms. Bedrooms became administrative offices. The former servants' quarters, once maintained for a staff of nearly 50, became dormitories for the first students of Salve Regina College. They preserved the Great Hall and most architectural signatures, but necessity demanded intervention. Partitions carved smaller rooms out of vast salons. Institutional furniture replaced the curated luxury of Allard's interiors. Paint-covered gilded surfaces once commissioned at extraordinary expense. Electrical upgrades, safety requirements, and daily student traffic reshaped the mansion not through neglect, but through continuous adaptation to academic life. This was not vandalism, it was survival. The sisters needed functional space, not a shrine to Gilded Age excess. Yet each modification quietly thinned the building's original identity. By 1950, Ochre Court remained structurally intact, but its place in Newport's Gilded Age narrative had slipped into obscurity. The mansion had not been destroyed. It had been used completely, constantly, and therefore forgotten. As Newport's preservation movement gained momentum after the Second World War, the breakers, Marble House, and the elms became pillars of a new tourism economy. The Preservation Society leveraged their spectacle, from gold leaf ceilings to imported marble, to attract millions of visitors and generate the revenue needed to preserve them. Ochre Court, however, had already slipped beyond their reach. It was gifted quietly in 1947, absorbed immediately into the operations of Salve Regina College, and excluded from the preservation pipeline that later defined Newport's identity. Tourism maps labeled the surrounding mansions with great care, highlighting architectural details and visiting hours. Ochre Court, the second largest of them all and one of Richard Morris Hunt's most ambitious Gothic works, appeared only as Salve Regina University Private. No guided tours, no admission fees, no preservation campaigns. Its fate was sealed not by neglect, but by utility. Classrooms, dormitories, and administrative offices replaced the interpretive storytelling that preserved its neighbors. Students walked daily beneath carved stone vaults and past decorative work by Carl Bitter. Without realizing they inhabited a structure once built for $4.5 million in 1892. Hunt's masterpiece stood fully intact and almost entirely unseen. The invisibility was not accidental. It was institutional. Ochre Court endures today, solid, imposing, and unmistakably Gothic, yet existing just outside the frame of Newport's celebrated mansion circuit. Salve Regina University maintains the chateau with care. The Great Hall still rises 3 full stories, its carved stone fireplace unaltered since Hunt designed it in the 1890s. The limestone exterior remains largely as he intended, weathered by Atlantic winds but structurally sound. Yet its survival follows a path entirely unlike the breakers or Marble House. There are no tour schedules, no preservation plaques recounting the Gothic legacy, no velvet ropes guarding original furnishings. Students move through rooms once shaped by Allard's craftsmen with notebooks and laptops instead of guidebooks. The building functions efficiently and constantly, and that practicality is precisely what removed it from public memory. 5 years of Gothic family enjoyment, 55 years of financial burden, more than 75 years of institutional use. The sequence explains everything. Ochre Court was not lost to disaster, demolition, or neglect. It was repurposed so completely that its identity dissolved into utility. What remains is a paradox. One of America's great Gilded Age palaces, perfectly intact yet nearly invisible. A masterpiece preserved, but not remembered. If stories like this one make you wonder how many other masterpieces slipped quietly out of history's spotlight, do not let this be the last. Like the video, share it, and subscribe. There are more hidden histories, forgotten architecture, and the strange truths buried in America's past. These places vanish when no one looks, so let us make sure we keep looking.